Let's combat and fight back with maltracks. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classes. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr. Maat.
A BB Timmy, a BB Fahodier. Peace to all of my thinkers, truth speakers, and truth seekers. Welcome to another Truth to Power Talk with your sister, Dr. Maat. Thank you for joining another powerful discussion. And tonight I have with me another powerful guest, but he is no stranger to the community, Professor James Small. How are you doing tonight, Professor?
Oh, I'm doing fine, Dr. Sister Maat. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, and I can't complain. I just looking forward to this discussion. You and I have been talking about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Dubois for the past week or so, Professor. And I shared with you that I was reading a book called The Color of Money. And in that book, the author, Baradan, she talked about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Dubois. And she talked about their ideologies. And I called you and you were saying that there were some things that weren't correct, some statements that she made in her textbook about them. And she called, W.E.B. Dubois an integrationist and someone who fought for civil rights. She talked about Booker T. Washington and how he accepted segregation and things of that nature. And so you were clearing up a lot of that stuff for me. Well, you were really giving me clarification, some context of what she was saying in her book. And so anyway, I'm just really looking forward to having this discussion with you. Family, take a moment out to thumb up this video. Please thumb up this video. Also, family, share the video. Okay, sharing is caring. And tonight, Baba's going to be giving out a lot of information. I'm telling you. And also, if you're watching on another platform, be sure to head on over to YouTube, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so that whenever I go live, you will be notified. Also, family, I've created a Truth to Power Talk playlist. And so if you missed any discussions that I've had, you can go in the archives and check them out. I've brought on Professor James Small numerous times. I've brought on Dr. Kaba Kamene, Dr. Malefe Asante, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. William Sandy Darity, and a lot of others. Baba Mwalimu Barudi, his complement, Ya Barudi. So brought on a lot of people, family. So make sure that you go in the archives and check it out. And also, join me on Sunday, each and every Sunday on this channel at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Read Book Club. All right. And so join me, even if you don't have the book, still tune in because you'll learn something from the discussions. All right, Professor, let's rock and roll. Let's jump into the topic tonight. And that is on W.E.B. Dubois and Booker T. Washington. And I really wanted to start out, Professor, with you talking about them, just who are they? How did they grow up? What were their ideologies separately?
Well, Booker T. Washington, we know, came up out of slavery and had this passion for education and went to school at what became Hampton University. It wasn't Hampton University then, it was what we might call a high school. And he he writes an extraordinary book, which is still extraordinary, and everybody should read it. It's called Up From Slavery. And if you haven't read Up From Slavery, you have no idea who Booker T. Washington is. He would take over what was then a high school in Tuskegee, or what we might call a junior high school in Tuskegee when he graduated from school in Hampton. And he parlayed that junior high school into Tuskegee University. Now, very many human beings pull a stunt like that off. He gave us George Washington Carver when no other university wanted to take him. And we got the extraordinary science and technologies and discoveries of Dr. Carver coming out of Tuskegee thanks to Booker T. Washington, giving him virtually carte blanche to run his science and agricultural division. And in building Tuskegee, he followed a line that we see in Marcus Garvey, we see in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, And it's talking about relying on self. Every brick on the building at Tuskegee was made on the grounds of Tuskegee by the students of Tuskegee.
Mm.
The building on Tuskegee campus was built by the faculty and students at Tuskegee. They built that university.
Mm.
And so that speaks to his concepts. He believed heavily in economics, developing yourself economically, that economic power would lead you to the kind of freedom and interdependence you wanted in America. And he believed that education, undergirding that, would lead you to the freedom and independence you want in America. Whereas our brother, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, believed in fighting for civil rights and developing a Black leadership cadre, which he called the talented 10th, would be the element that would lead us to freedom in America. He believed that fighting, Dr. Du Bois believed in fighting for your civil rights, getting especially the 14th and 15th Amendment passed. Those are the bases on which he founded or helped to found the NAACP. But how many people know that Du Bois was sitting at that table of founding of the NAACP? Booker T. Washington sat at the table founding the NAACP along with Du Bois.
Not many.
So did Ida B. Wells and others, T. Thomas Fortune. But they had some fundamental disagreement with the direction it was going to go in early on, and they all left. Because that was the first organization that they had developed that had whites as a critical element of the leadership, both Irish and Jewish. And that was the purpose of getting money, getting white support, getting white liberal support to help fight, to have the enforcement of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which would guarantee the human rights and civil rights of Blacks in the United States of America, and guarantee their rights to vote and participate in the political process. So that's what Du Bois was trying to have happen. And Booker said, that ain't gonna happen. So let's put our buckets down where we are. We own millions of acres of land. Let's hold on to that millions of acres of land and turn the farmland into an economic powerhouse for ourselves. Booker T. Washington said, we are the carpenters, all the skills we brought from being enslaved. We are the plumbers. We are the brick masons. We are the chimney makers. We are the house painters. Let's control this industry. All right. And develop our economic foundation. Let's get educated, meaning getting the tools and the skills we need to provide food, clothing, shelter, and safety. Booker Du Bois felt that the approach based on his background coming out of a Harvard University, Harvard and a university in Berlin, and was it Yale or Columbia? But it was the three of the most powerful white universities in the world at that time. And so he came from that orientation. Booker came from slavery. His education was being enslaved. His education was living in the South with the terrorism and the segregation of enslavement and post-Reconstruction, which was as bad, if not worse, than slavery. W. Du Bois grows up in New England, Boston, Massachusetts, who had ended slavery back in the 1700s. Their racism was still there, but the institution was deconstructed. Extraordinary thing people don't know about Dr. Du Bois, his grandfather had moved to Haiti, had a baby by a Haitian sister, left that baby in Haiti to grow up. That baby, as a grown man, migrated back to Massachusetts and became the father of W.B. Du Bois.
Baba, no.
Stuff on you, girl, And so a lot of Du Bois's idea about Pan-Africanism and Africanism, remember his dissertation is in what? What was the dissertation? It was in the suppression of the transatlantic slave trade. That was his dissertation. The suppression of the transatlantic slave trade. How many people was writing about that back then?
Not many.
Okay. So even though they had these fundamental disagreement with how to proceed in terms of freedom ideology, when Booker T. Washington, when W.E.B. Du Bois went to London to plan that big first Pan-African conference, guess who traveled with him to London? Booker T. Washington. And I'm sure Booker T was the one with the money, and I'm sure he paid for the trip. When they came back from London, before the conference goes on, it's Booker T. Washington who controlled the most powerful propaganda machine in the Black community that promoted the conference for Dr. Du Bois. But because he didn't go and speak at the conference, people hold that against him. If I did all your publicity for free, I went with you there to set it all up for the English folks, because Du Bois had no credibility in England, but Booker T did. Then why do I have to come and speak? But see, that's how white folks, when we let white folks interpret our political history, they tell you what to dwell on. No, the fundamental difference was ideological. These men were friends, they were brothers, and they had been struggling since the youngest years. But the fundamental difference was an ideological difference. Booker felt that Du Bois felt that what the approach that Booker was taking was reinforcing segregation and discrimination. Booker felt that unless we develop an economic foundation, we would have no power, even if we had the right to vote. And he proved to be right historically.
Well, let me ask you this, Professor. So I know you're getting into what the philosophical difference were, or the ideological difference, but with Booker T, and I want to, because you just kind of sparked a thought. With Booker T. Washington, I've read some literature where they've inserted quotes, or literature that contained quotes from him, where he encouraged Black people to do certain things, like to get these skills, to get the economics together, because he wanted us to be accepted by white people and respected by white people. And so some of those things that he was saying.
Was that any difference from me wanting civil rights to be accepted and respected? See, it's how people play what happens. You could say the same thing about what Du Bois was doing, talking about the talented 10, talking about getting our civil rights and our right to vote and our right to integrate.
So that is, like you said, that is being accepted.
Okay, so you could make the same statement about both, but we have to begin to interpret for ourselves when we look back at history. I don't have a copy of the Atlanta speech, but I know some of it verbatim. When he's speaking, the speech that everybody beats him up over, because they don't really read, and most people who beat him up have never read speech. In that speech, he said to his people, he's got this wife. This is the Atlanta Exposition. It was like a mini World Fair. And he fought to get Black in the exposition, because normally we were excluded from that. An exposition where you went and took your plants that you grew that year, sell your crops that you sold that year, any new machinery that you created to help in agriculture, you brought that year, different things. Yeah, so an exposition. And he fought to get Blacks in that exposition. And he was one of the keynote speakers. And in his speech, he says to the white folks, and listen well, remember, this is what, about the turn of the century, just before the turn of the century, we're getting two things happening in America. The floodgates is open for European immigration. You're getting a heavy Irish immigration, a heavy Jewish Eastern European and German Jewish integration, a heavy Italian integration. What do these people have? This poor, underclass, working class European. They're carpenters, they're plumbers, they're painters, they're brick masons. They have the skills we have. And Booker's saying to the white folks, yo, boss, he didn't say boss, I'm just joking. He said, yo, look, why would you forsake me, who when your father was in difficult times, I stood at his bedside? Meaning, what he implied, I could have killed him, but I didn't do that. So why would you forsake me, who have proven my loyalty to this institution, for people whose culture and language you do not understand? What did he mean by that?
Break it down, Professor.
What did he mean? He mean, why would you knock me out of the job market for these Eastern European people who have shown no loyalty to you, had no friendship with you, you don't even speak their language and they don't speak yours, and you're going to cut me for them? And we see that happening right now with another ethnic groups coming from the South.
Come on.
And the white community is doing the same thing that Booker was trying to stop them from doing to Black folks then. We didn't learn the lesson then. We didn't learn the lesson now. We are going ahead and marching for folks who come and says, you know, I'm impoverished, I'm poor, but they'll take the job that you've tried to make a union job and take it for less than minimum wage, knocking you completely out of the job. And you look around like, duh, why am I unemployed? Why didn't they side with me in building the union, building the strength that we need so we could both be employed? And then the population end up siding with the ruling elite and what, not with you. Booker lays all that shit out in the speech. You got to read it.
Mm-hmm. And Baba, you know what?
But one thing, when you read the speech, go with the brain that this man is being very clandestine. He tells the Black people, put your buckets down where you are. We've got millions of acres of land. Hold on to that land.
Yes.
Okay. We lost all that land because we didn't listen to Booker Washington. Okay. Now we begging to buy some land somewhere in the South, when at that time we owned nearly all of the South. But we didn't listen. And so he goes further. He says to the white community, because he was speaking simultaneously to the Black community and to the white community, right? So he says to the white community, and things social, meaning the things that Du Bois is talking about, the integration, the voting, the hanging out. He said, we can be like the fingers, do your thing culturally, and I do mine. But in things political and economic, we'll be like the fists. You're not going to have no more than I got. Now, how do you miss that? Reading that speech, you know? And so when we read that speech now, thank God I was taught it earlier by Mr. Woodson, who was my history teacher in high school, Howard High down in Georgetown, South Carolina, a Geechee boy and Geechee country lesson from a Geechee grandfather. I got to read that speech and study it, and I understood why the people loved Booker so. Because they knew him, he was them. He knew we were in the South. You couldn't talk Du Bois's talk in the South. You would get lynched before the sun went down. Okay? You would get lynched before the sun went down. And people don't understand, they talk about Mr. Garvey and Mr. Booker. You can't compare them because Mr. Booker invited Mr. Garvey here.
Come on, talk about it, Baba.
And they were friends. Read Tony Martin's work on Garvey. And Tony is the greatest author on the life of Marcus Garvey. And you see that Booker held the conference before Du Bois held the conference, the first Pan-African conference. Booker held at Tuskegee the first conference on the African world, on the Negro world, he called it. People came from South Africa, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Malawi, from Mozambique, from Liberia, from Sierra Leone, from Jamaica, from Trinidad, attending that conference. Garvey couldn't come because the British would not let him leave to attend this Booker T. Washington conference. They were afraid of the two coming together.
And they never met, did they, Baba? Booker T and Marcus Garvey never met.
But there's a trove of letters in the Schomburg Library between the two of them. Okay, I read those letters before they went to the Schomburg, because Booker T. Washington III was my partner in the OAAU founded by Malcolm X. He was an architect, and he lived right down the street from the headquarters. Okay, and he had the letters. After his death, his wife gave the letters to the Schomburg Library. It's the most extraordinary body of reading. People should read it. The correspondence between Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey. When Garvey came, Garvey initially wanted to come and teach at Tuskegee, but Booker said, no, you can't bring those ideas down here in the South, because that ain't gonna fly. So Booker tells him to go to the Northeast, to New York. And I guess it's about 5 months before Garvey gets here, Booker dies. A young man, but he's still in his 40s, late 40s. And he dies after he comes to New York for a meeting. to settle the rift between him and Monroe Trotter. And this meeting was presided of, Du Bois was at the meeting, Trotter was at the meeting, a group of white folks was at the meeting. Something happened at that meeting and Booker got sick. And they rushed him to the hospital. I contend they poisoned him. Somebody poisoned him. They took him to St. Luke's Hospital. And when he realized he wasn't going to make it, he sent a telegram to Tuskegee to his aide and his wife to come and get him. And they came to New York and got him and put him on the train for home. He died when the train pulled into the station at Baltimore, Maryland. Now, you ask most people, where did he die? And they give you all kinds of stories. No, he died on the train.
In Baltimore,
Maryland. Okay. No one looks at his death as being suspicious, even though there was an attempt on his life in New York, I think about 8 months or 9 months before, where he was beaten in the head with a lead pipe and ended up in the hospital. And they try to play it in the negative by saying, oh, he was coming from the home of his white girlfriend, which is bull. He was a good friend with that white couple, and they were like brothers and sisters to him. So that you can't play that off. And then say, no, the white people beat him because of this. That's not what that was about. Nobody know what it's about because the police didn't give a damn then, just as they don't now, because a black man got beat up in the streets and left on the sidewalk to die. But we don't know the stories. But someone put up there, well, that we don't study history, and that is our greatest weakness, our ignorance of our history. Booker T. Washington, one of the men who attend Tuskegee and remain a good friends of Booker T. Washington, became the leader of the revolution in Malawi to free Malawi from colonialism. Another one of the men who was at that conference, who was one of Booker T's confidants, he became one of the leaders of the ANC that eventually under Nelson Mandela freed South Africa. So we need to study some history here and we'll change our mind. And there's an extraordinary book by an extraordinary young lady, Dr. Tyreen, I'm going to get Sister Wright's name, Tyreen Wright, PhD. She attended Tuskegee and she wrote this extraordinary book. Let me put it right. Can you see it?
Book, yep, Speaker T. Washington in Africa, The Making of a Pan-Africanist.
Right. You got to get that book.
I will, right. Baba.
And you got to read it. And in there was another occasion, Booker took the skills of Tuskegee and tried to move it to help Africans. And so he set up cotton farms in Togo. Togo at that time is under the German. The German were colonists in Africa at this time. So the Germans tried to take over the plantations that he was trying to set up, these cotton plantations for black people. And before he would let the Germans take it over, he closed them down and moved his people from Tuskegee out of Togo. Study the history. But the European knew Booker was giving us the right path. And that's why he tries to kill our knowledge about Booker Washington. Booker Washington, you know, Malcolm X, somebody asked Malcolm, said, Brother Minister Malcolm, what do you mean by black nationalism? He said, black nationalism means you control the economic, politics, and culture where you live. Wasn't that what Booker trying to tell us? Put your bucket down where you at. Build your economics because that's your power. Get educated so you can run the institutions in your community, in your society. He told the white folks, and think social. You want to party with yourself? Good. You want to hang out at the theater by yourself? Good. And think social will be like the fingers. But in things political and economic, we are like the fists. We going to be one.
So Baba, let me ask you this.
This is in that one little speech that people try to turn around and make negative.
Yeah, and make negative. So Baba, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts about people criticizing him for taking money from white folks during that time? You know, that was a big criticism.
You take money from? You take money from whoever's giving you money.
Come on.
Dubois, did he not go to Harvard? Did he not go to school in Germany? And I'm not against W. Du Bois. I love them both. And both is critical to the development of our consciousness. But the conflict was ideological between them, not personal. These men were professionals and friends, you see, until the death of Booker. And so Du Bois had one ideology, Booker had another ideology. Du Bois had one methodology, Booker had another methodology. Neither was necessarily wrong. If they could have fused those efforts, we may have had a greater thrust forward, you see. But even today, we are having those same discussions.
Absolutely.
You know, when Malcolm's time, he the black nationalist, and Dr. King is the civil righter. Both of them was fighting for the freedom of black people. They had different methodologies and a different ideological approach. And at the end of Malcolm's life, him and Dr. King came together. There was a meeting in Queens at Ruby Dee's brother's home. And every one of the civil rights leaders was there, and Malcolm X was there. Dr. King was the only one that wasn't there because he had a previous appointment, but he sent his rep there. And they all agreed they would work together. At that meeting, Fannie Lou Hamer invited Malcolm to come to Mississippi 2 weeks after that. They killed him before he could get to Mississippi. Study history. Malcolm said history is best to reward all research.
That's right.
I say history not only free your mind, it frees your behind, but if you know your history, you can get rid of the enemy's mystery.
That's
know
a
your
fact.
history, get rid of their mystery. I'm sorry.
No problem, Baba. I know you're a busy man. No problem. So, Baba, let me ask you this: going into W.E.B. Dubois, towards the latter part of his life, he made the decision to move to Ghana, and I had the honor of going to Ghana and seeing his home and his bookshelves, and he's buried right, like in he's buried right there in one of those.
Yeah, extraordinary African scholar, an extraordinary black man.
Mausoleum. That's the word I was looking for. Mausoleum. He's buried in a mausoleum right on his right across from his home.
Yeah. That's why we can't constantly let history have us pit these two men together, because that's not their life story. They had that ideological disagreement, and they stated in writing on an occasion or so, but most of their lives was working together with one another. If you go back to 1892, an organization was formed under the leadership of a man named T. Thomas Fortune. Booker T. Washington was in it. W.B. Du Bois was in it. Ida B. Wells was in it. A number of others was in it. It was called the remember 1892, right? It's called the Afro-American League. Malcolm X wasn't born yet, but it's Afro-American unity. But Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois and T. Thomas Fortune led Booker T. Washington's propaganda operation. T. Thomas Fortune had the largest black newspaper in the country before Marcus Garvey came. And he became finally the editor of Marcus Garvey, The Negro World. UNIA, because most of Booker's people joined Marcus Garvey when Garvey got here. So read Tony Martin on the subject. Garvey said when he got here, I come to institute the Tuskegee model. Let me say that again. So people got to get it, see? According to Dr. Tony Martin, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said, I come to implement the Tuskegee model. So what was the UNIA? But we allow our enemy, who does the analysis of our struggle, to split us. And then we study history without really studying our side of history, and begin to write books on a split that never existed. Even Du Bois and Garvey, who got into a nasty spat, should have never happened.
Yeah, I heard about it.
Both of them were wrong and immature. But they got past that. Nobody talks about that. When Du Bois, he became a Marxist sympathizer early in his life. The Communist Revolution takes place in 1917. And you had the Eastern European population who was in this country at that time, trying to make a way for themselves, attaching themselves to our struggle. And everybody know who I'm talking about, calling themselves our liberal friends. But they were primarily Marxists. And they were pushing the socialist movement and the Communist League and all of this. They brought that from Europe with them, And so a lot of us turned to that, because it was something progressive. It was fighting against the same people who were fighting against a very organized structural thing. When you look at Marxism and Leninism, the way it was laid out in the Communist Youth League, Socialist Workers' Party, and so forth, easy to grasp, easy to use. Then you get to hang out with white folks. You get to integrate. I'm sorry, but that was a part of it, right? And so in the 1920s, we've got black people running for president from the Communist Party, you know, like Davis and others. So Du Bois, like Paul Robeson, became a part of that environment because those people were saying they will help us with our civil rights. They would help fight against the segregation and the lynching and the murders in the South and the tyranny we were living under. And so it would be a natural alliance. So I don't find anything wrong with making that kind of alliance. We just have to historically study and understand what happened when the alliances were made. And there's a great scholar that people seem to have forgotten. His name was Dr. Harold Cruz. He wrote the book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual.
I've heard of that.
It's an extraordinary book, should be a must read for everybody. But his greatest work to me is the last piece, and I was one of he tutored me at City College for a while. He was at Columbia University. His last book was called Plural but Equal, and it is an analysis of the civil rights movement and the struggle leading up to the modern civil rights movement. And you're going to get a lesson in history. You read that book. It's called Plural but Equal by Dr. Harold Cruz.
Plural but equal. Let me write that down, Baba.
Yes, ma'am.
Plural
And
but equal.
Negro Intellectual was also a necessary read. If you really want to understand the men and women who are involved at that time, coming from our side of the slate, that's analyzing what's going on here. So Du Bois and Booker, they were never enemies. They had ideological disagreements like many of us do today, and we state them. But that don't make me your enemy.
Bob, it was called Plural. Say that again. Plural.
Yeah, Plural but Equal.
Plural but equal. Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Harold Cruz. One of the greatest scholars we have, but because he opposed this left-wing European liberal involvement in our struggle, he gets buried in intellectual history, scholarship history, and he's one of the greatest scholars we've ever produced. And of course, he was black skinned and dark, and that didn't help the situation any, even in New York.
And so,
the Honorable Marcus Garvey completely demolished Du Bois. That's silly. Yes, they had a rift, and Garvey was more right than Du Bois, but Mugabe was wrong to have meetings with the Ku Klux Klan.
Come on, talk about it, Baba.
This is Du Bois' hometown. You don't come in my hometown, and then you decide, I'm going to meet with your enemy, and we ain't going to have no discussion about this. I don't want to get into that now, but before people start talking about Garvey and Du Bois, find out what that fight was about. The same reason why Malcolm X got dumped from the Nation of Islam. When he found out that the Nation had a meeting down in Atlanta he was invited to with Robert Shelton, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and Malcolm hit the friggin' ceiling, and he was barred from going back into the South ever again. And everything went downhill for him and the Nation after that. And within a year, he was ousted. His ousting didn't have nothing to do with Kennedy's death. It had to do with some fundamental disagreement and behavior on the part of people he's supposed to be working with. Du Bois wasn't right in his negative response to Garvey, and Garvey wasn't right. And think you can come and meet with my right-wing enemy because we have something in common with my murderer and my oppressor, and we don't even have a dialogue. When I'm here in my country, in my home, you can call it whatever you want to, leading this movement for nearly 30 years before you got here, and I don't matter. And many of the people that joined Dr. Garvey were people who had worked in organization with Du Bois. There were people who worked in organization with Booker. He didn't bring his army from Jamaica. That was an African-American army. They had been fighting segregation and racism and classism long before Mr. Garvey got here. All of the Black Wall Streets we had was built before Mr. Garvey got here. So don't demean a people because there was a problem between a couple of the leaders at a particular time. Nobody blamed Mr. Garvey when he got out of prison for the death of the Black man who ran against him for president of the UNIA. So don't fool with me. And nobody tell me why he was murdered in New Orleans a few weeks after the election, which he almost won. But we don't need to have those kind of discussions. And we can take any discussion and make it a negative one. I'm saying, let's look at both sides
That's right.
of the story. And let Black people do our own research and let us come up with our own conclusions. And the most telling one is the Atlanta exposition speech, which everybody insists because the white people called it that, the Atlantic Compromise. And you tell me, if you can intelligently read that speech, understanding the time that we are in at that time, and call it a compromise. You can't do it. I love Garvey. He's my father. He's my God in some ways. I love the Bois. He's my father. He's my God. They had differences. I love the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He'll always be a holy man to me. But I also love the Honorable Malcolm X. He's my great spiritual and political leader. Did they have differences? Yes. But those differences didn't drown all the good things they did together for the betterment of this group that allow us to be where we are at today.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Baba, going back to my initial question, because I don't know. You may have answered it, you may not. I asked, why did W.E.B. Dubois, why did he move to Ghana?
He was invited to Ghana by the president of Ghana, who was a friend of his, Kwame Nkrumah. And Nkrumah invited him to Ghana, one, to give him a peaceful place to live, because America was treating him like a dog. And so Nkrumah said, come home and come and write the Encyclopedia of Africa for us. And that's what he was working on when he died. An encyclopedia.
The Africana, right?
Yeah, now they call it Encyclopedia Africana. There are some people still working on it, trying to complete it.
Baba, I have it. I got it in college. Hold on. Okay. Go ahead and keep on building. I want to grab it real quick.
Okay. And so the boys went home, and Nkrumah gave him a home and land and protection, and even given him an allowance. And he lived there until he died. And his home has been turned into a museum with all of his library, his robes, his writings that was unpublished. His tomb is just outside of his front door. And his wife, that's Shirley Dubois, her remains, which was cremated, is right there in the same facility. And Du Bois is a main figure in Africa, because when the conference that they did, the second conference on the Manchester Conference on Pan-Africanism, and Nkrumah was there, Jomo Kenyatta was there, Ezekiel was there, all of the men that would become presidents of the liberated African nation was a part of a process that W. Du Bois helped, along with C.L.R. James and other Caribbean leaders who initiated this process of Pan-Africanism to bring into being. You got it, sister. You know? And so when we study our own stuff, like I brought up Harold Cruz, and every time I bring up Dr. Harold Cruz, Encyclopedia Africana, every time I bring up Dr. Harold Cruz, hardly nobody ever heard of such an extraordinary writer who wrote with a love for us and our freedom, because our left-wing liberal ally enemies decide whose writing we would see, whose writing we would see, you know. And part of why Malcolm X is dead is because they latched on to Malcolm and tried to use their press and their socialist instruments to drag him into their camp at that critical 12 months while Malcolm was fighting to find a safe space for himself and his family, and trying to find an African ally to help him stand up against the crisis he was facing in America. He was murdered by collaboration between the CIA, FBI, elements of the Nation of Islam, and the New York City Police Department. So let's stop playing. You know, Malcolm, when he used to preach in the nation, he said, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Truth alone will set you free, he said, and he took that right out of the Bible. So I watch all these folks playing. There's enough information now. We got these computers here now. We got all kinds of tools to do research now that even I didn't have when I was coming to high school and college.
Oh, yeah. Same here, Baba.
Do the research and create new research. And then you see the role of Garvey, and you'll see the role of Booker, and you'll see the role of Du Bois, and you'll see the role of Malcolm, and you'll see the role of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And you'll see the role of Ida B. Wells. You see the role of Maggie,
Walker.
Sister Maggie Walker, the banker down in
Right.
Virginia.
Yes.
I mean, she didn't just open a bank. She had a whole economic movement. Started out at the St. Luke Benevolent Penny Association. People were putting 1 penny in the pot and they came up with millions. Because they believed in each other and they believed in the unity of Black people. So we need to read, this is Black History Month. Don't be arguing about, oh, they gave us the shortest month. They didn't give us a damn thing.
Come on.
And the NACP and the other brothers and sisters picked this month because they thought they can get this through because it was the month that Fred Douglass was born in, and it was the month that Abe Lincoln was born in. So they figured that would give them the rites of passage. There was no other month they could see they could get accepted in a legal framework that because of the racism in America. And they pulled it off. I would have rather it be July so I could sport my African garments, you know what I'm saying? And be looking good, flipping that cloth up and stuff. But I'll take this cold if I can talk to my ancestors. I'll take this cold if I can teach these young children what I know. I'll take this cold if I can remember the beauty of the greatest thing God ever created, and that is the African race. I don't care whether somebody thinks that's prejudice or
right.
Let history speak for me and my ancestors and my people from the beginning of time to now, and they will tell a greater story than I can ever tell. Because if we wanted to kill the European for the terrorism and the genocide against us, we cooked their meals, we could have killed them all, but that's not our way. We're not the barbarians. We will find a way, like we have done. We've done more to change America into a free, democratic, human environment than any other group in the history of America. We changed this Constitution, and no other group has ever made them change their Constitution multiple times to provide human rights to everybody. So don't be playing with us. Or because you can keep some of us down, you can murder our children because you won't teach them in the schools, and then you keep us from controlling our schools, and you put them in prison and criminalize them and take away their human rights and their civil rights. Okay, we'll get you. We're getting there. Most of our children don't go to prison. Most of our children go either to college or into some sort of profession. Most of our children have never used drugs. Most of yours have.
Tell it, Bob.
Okay. Look at the statistics, your statistics. I tell people, there's a book you can get. You got to do it online now. You got to go to the federal bookstore, and it's called the Uniform Crime Report. Go back about 10 years. Blow your mind. Go back 20 years, and you'll be running around the street dancing when you realize who the real criminal in America is, because they keep the statistics on even themselves. But let's come back to our two brothers. Yes, our brothers, there's a moment of disagreement. And that disagreement probably lasts in terms of their ideological differences. But those men worked together through all of those years. Booker gave Du Bois his first job. You know? So we need to restudy both of them, study the differences they had, and see, are we still fighting around those same ideological differences today? And how can we change this pattern of interaction around our ideological views about methodology for changing the society for the better? That was the crisis they had. That was the crisis. I'm sorry it got so profane. It wasn't between Garvey over Du Bois. Du Bois may have done more for Black Americans than Garvey did. You know, Garvey wasn't here long enough to do that. Garvey's dynamic and extraordinary skills was in organizing, really even beyond mass organization. And because of the Blacks and the Merchant Marine Service, they were able to spread the message around the world. You see? And at that time, that was possible that way with the Merchant Marine. Garvey didn't know nobody here. Booker was already dead when he got here. He probably had a few friends from home, but who helped him? build the UNIA. These are 99% African-American activists that mostly come from the Booker T. Washington and the W.E.B. Du Bois camp. So let's stop the foolishness. Let's start studying. Who was Henrietta Benton Davis? Do you know her?
Sister out in Baltimore.
Out of Baltimore.
Uh-huh.
She was
And she was Garvey's right hand woman.
Yes, she was the
And
number
held
2
it
person in the
down.
UNIA.
Absolutely.
When
And when he
Garvey
got
went
in
to
prison,
prison,
she held him down.
she was the one that was the president while he was in prison.
Absolutely.
You know, and when he went to Jamaica, she left here and went to Jamaica with him after his deportation.
Now that I didn't know, Baba.
Yes, she stayed there for a number of years, and then they had some differences, and she came back and joined the Philadelphia chapter of the UNIA, which she worked with until the day she died. She was the protege of Frederick Douglass. She was a school teacher in Baltimore, and she was an actress. They call it elocutionist then. A very powerful woman. And if you ever seen the picture of the leadership of the UNIA on the step in Harlem, which is the classic picture, look in the center of the picture. That light-skinned lady you see there, that's Henrietta Benton Davis. She was about 6 feet tall. When
6 feet?
6 feet tall. When
Ooh.
the Black Star Liner sailed, she was the one on board and in charge. Okay. But when the police stopped the ship in Jacksonville, Florida, and quarantined it and wouldn't let them sail, under the guise that some brothers had escaped from the chain gang, and they were scared that they would take the brothers on the ship and take them to South America, which was a lie. But they kept the ship there until it ran out of food and ran out of supplies. Many of the people got angry, left, made their way back home, and they blamed that on Henrietta. But when we begin to understand history, we'll erase the Europeans' mystery, and you'll understand what really is going on here. No man or woman makes the movement. We get caught up in the white man's superhero thing. That's why we're in a mess we're in today. Collectives make movements. Peoples in a collective, communal, cooperative relationship make movements.
Facts, Baba.
When you reduce a movement to a person, you've destroyed the entire history of that movement.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like you said, it wasn't Dr. King all by himself. During for the civil rights movement, he had a whole, like you said, it was a collective.
Yeah, same thing with Malcolm X, the same thing with the Honorable Marcus Garvey or the Bois or others. What we've got to do is study our history and see what the mistakes is. All of them made mistakes. And when our enemy allow us to get us to only focus on the mistake, here men who are fighting in the same arena for 30, 40, 50 years, or 30, 40 years, 20, 30 years, and we're going to focus on an argument that took place December the 2nd, 1909, or some foolishness of 1915. What's wrong with our brain? So they had this disagreement, whether it lasts a week, a month, or a year, but they were working together for 10, 15 years, or 20 years. What happened to the rest of that time? How did they settle those agreements? How did they back away from it? But we don't study that. We allow our enemies to tell us how to stay divided. How to stay divided. Instead of figuring out what were the moments of unity that they have and how did they arrive at those unity moments. We talk about the UNIA and we talk about the Honorable Marcus Garvey, but nobody talks about the role of the Baptist Church, the Black Baptist Church in that whole movement, or the role of the AME Church in that movement. Without those two elements, you wouldn't have had a spread of the UNIA, because those are the places that open their pulpit across Black America. Or know that Henrietta Benton Davis spoke both English, Spanish, and French, and went through Central South America to help to organize. So we need to study history. See? And when we study our history for ourselves and read our scholarship for ourselves, then we'll truly understand the greatness of a Du Bois, the greatness of a Booker Washington, the greatness of a Marcus Garvey, the greatness of a Dr. King, the greatness of an Ida B. Wells. Imagine being down in Mississippi and you're a Black woman, just a young budding journalist. I just had to put this in because I happen to love Ida B. Wells. If she came out that grave today and offered to marry me, I'd marry her tomorrow. and this young Black woman sees that in her community, 2 Black men are murdered for opening a grocery store.
The People's Grocery Store.
right?
Broke my heart.
You know, and they blow up her office, burn her shit down. She still did not want to leave. The elders had to force her to get out of here, girl, or they gonna kill you. Go and help fight this thing. And she left her southern home and launched the most fierce movement against lynching in the history of this country. And her biggest donor was Booker Teleferia Washington. But yet people would look at Mr. Washington and play him down. Don't do that. Even the NAACP with the white folks in it, you got to look at its achievements. The NAACP has some extraordinary achievements because the white folks wasn't the only people in the NAACP. The majority of the people running that organization, making decisions, were Black people. You know? And they have some extraordinary legal achievements. Some of the greatest legal achievements in the history of the world, where an oppressed people is fighting the mega giant ruling elite. And those same whites and the liberals thought that W. Du Bois was too radical, right? So they kicked him out of all of the political leadership, and he was running the magazine. And they eventually took the magazine away from him because he was too radical for them. So study history, and especially how crews work. Plural but equal. For God's sake, buy that book for me.
I have it. I wrote it down.
Buy it for me. Plural but Equal by Dr. Harold Cruz. You know? And buy the book by Dr. Tyreen Wright, Booker T. Washington, and Africa.
That's the one. That's the one I didn't catch. That's the one I didn't catch.
Yeah, Booker T.
Say the name.
Booker T. Washington and Africa.
Booker T.
The Making of a Pan-Africanist by Dr. Tyreen Wright, PhD, from Tuskegee University.
The Making of a Pan-Africanist.
And so, yes, it's sad. Malcolm and Elijah had a rift, and we saw the harm it did. Booker and Du Bois had a rift, and I'm sure for their time it did harm. Du Bois and the Honorable Marcus Garvey had a rift, and I'm sure it did harm. Let's learn from those mistakes in history that our elders made and not repeat them, glorify, or praise one or the other, because both is wrong if they couldn't settle that contradiction. If they didn't fight to settle it, you may not be able to settle it, but you must fight to settle it. Most people don't know when Malcolm X got killed, the Muslim mosque closed. I came home from the military a few months later and became a member of OAU. In a month, became his sister Ella's bodyguard. And a month later, was voted in, the only imam in America that was voted not just by his congregation, but voted in as imam of the Muslim Mosque, Inc., by a council of elders, both from America, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan. And I didn't pursue a war against the Nation of Islam. I was 20 years old, and I did have a formidable army. But I didn't do that. I pursued peace between my community and the nation. And I am the only imam to serve as imam of Muslim mosques since the death of Malcolm X. Today, the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood, with my blessings and consent, now acts in the stead of the Muslim Mosque, Inc. And most of the members of the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood were members of Muslim Mosque, Inc. under Malcolm and myself. So I'm not just Professor Small. I didn't just arrive at a college. I was in Mecca before most of you were even born. Hajj, Shahid. But I found that that was not our religion. As I studied Black history and studied African history, I go, somebody else was running the slave trade for 1,500 years before we met Columbus. Who were they? The Turkish and Arab Muslim world. 1,500 years of enslavement and genocide. And so I walked away from Islam for that reason. And other reasons, the modern racism that still pervades those societies. But if you don't study history, you'll be caught up in their mystery, and you won't even see your murderer sleeping in your own bed. So history is just a magnificent tool, a glorious tool. And so I'm just an African. I'm just the Geechee, my little tribe in America. I'm a Gullah Geechee boy from South Carolina, living in swamps and in woods in Georgetown County. Both sides of my family come from a maroon community, because we didn't use the word maroon community here. We call they call the Freewood N word, the Freewood N's. That's what we were called by white people. They didn't call us we were the Freewood N's, but that's all right. My grandmother was a root lady, and we learned a lot. And I think that's why I went into the spiritual realm, the spiritual world, to study and into traditional religions and so forth, because I was taught and raised by a root woman of high quality. Her father was from Rwanda, Uganda. Her mama was from Sierra Leone. And she was the first generation born here on that side. And that was my mama. They call her Miss Pigeon. But just to come back, the point I'm trying to make is we've always had a culture. We never lost our culture. We just hid it in different little places, and then we disguise it in plain sight.
I'm glad, Professor, that you're addressing this, because it's in the minds of, non-Africans and even some continental Africans. I just want to be real. They say that Black Americans don't have a culture.
Why is everybody running over here pretending to be us? Our minority too. Leave us be then. Let us have our way. If we got nothing, leave us alone. Teach us our nothing history then. And let us tell the story of your world. Everybody know who we are. They're just scared, because either they've committed a crime against us, or they've profited from the crime against us, or they're just ignorant of the crime against us. But here we are, in the biggest White House ever built in the world, and we still alive and we still thrive. What you gonna say? You want to deny my language retention? You don't want to call it Ebonics like we do? Or you don't want to call it Gullah or Geechee? That's cool. We be who we be. You be who you are. And let's see who got what. Just our community, under all of our know nothing, no sculpture, no oppression, we have more surplus money in any given year for the last 20 years than any single African nation in terms of its GDP. So who are you talking to? Or any Asian nation except China, or any Caribbean nation. Last year we spent $1.6 trillion. That don't count our savings. The year before was 1.3 trillion. The year before, 1.1 trillion. But we're at war. It's a psychological war. It's a political war. It is a culture war. So I don't blame any of my brothers and sisters from any part of the world, nor do I blame the ignorant among us right here in America who have done worse to their own ethnic people. Because ignorance is ignorance.
Absolutely.
And our job, those of us who see, and that's why I'm on your show tonight, as tired as I am, because we have an obligation. Dr. Maat called and says, I want to do something tomorrow night. Well, what am I going to say? No. So no, we trying to do the best we can. Now, I may not even have all the pieces, but I've given you enough pieces to make you curious to go and read and find some more of the pieces.
Absolutely.
Tell the story in an even greater way of these two great men. Yes, they had conflicts, and that breaks your heart and it's sad. But we'll see many occasions in their life where they rose way beyond those conflicts to work together to do things for our people. And we will not allow anybody, even in our community, to try and reduce our movement leaders' relationship to an argument they had. If I wanted to get real deep, I would say that if you want to explore something for real, explore the fact that maybe what they were angry at each other about is both of them like the same women, except Booker ended up getting the woman. So I'm not going to go no further with that one, So that may be the soul of what the riff was about. And we know a lot of that goes on in the world.
It does.
But who can deny the greatness of a W.E.B. Dubois? Who could deny the greatness of a Booker T. Washington? And the reason I brought the Honorable Marcus Garvey into this, because Booker invites him here. And all of Booker's people, if not all, most of Booker's people, when Booker dies, they go with the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Don't that tell you something? So how you going to say Booker's an Uncle Tom? The Honorable Marcus Garvey didn't call him an Uncle Tom. He called him his brother.
And his inspiration. He said he was inspired by him.
Yes. So all of them were great men. Yes, the Bois went wrong. He could have approached the Honorable Messiah Marcus Garvey differently over that issue, over that meeting. But he came from his emotional, personal weakness. And Garvey responded with his emotional, personal weakness. And hopefully, history will let us see that they didn't remain enemies. They didn't write letters every day cussing each other out. That's somebody else's myth. Okay. They had problems. We have problems now. Malcolm and Dr. King had issues.
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking about when you talked about Booker and Dubois. I was like, okay, Malcolm and Martin, but they made up. They reconciled.
Adam Clayton Powell and Dr. King had issues. But they had more things they worked together on than issues that divided them. And the same for Booker T and Du Bois. And we need to learn from all of them because all of them had a piece of the answer. None of them had all of the answer.
That's right.
But all of them had a piece of the answer. And we need to learn from them. You know, when Garvey came, he was a young man. You know, because he's all stocky, we think of them as old men. He was not no old man. He was in his 30s or late 20s. This is a young boy doing this stuff. Malcolm died at 39. Most of that work he did, he was in his 20s and early 30s. Dr. King died at 39. The work he did was in his 20s and early 30s. These were kids.
Yes, that was a fact. Yeah. Yeah.
And if they would have riff, how can some people not understand that? The same liberal people who push that differences with their Marxist left ideology don't tell you about the rift in Russia between the Minskovits, who really overthrew the Russian royalty, and how they got ripped off, beat up, murdered by the Bolsheviks, who comes in under Lenin's leadership, and then Lenin and Trotsky, and then Stalin. And so the Minskovits all ran to America. They call themselves our liberal friends. But anyway, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. All right?
Facts.
Study Harold Cruz's book, Dr. Harold Cruz, Plural but Equal. Study LaRon Bennett, Before the Mayflower.
Yes, I did.
Get the revised edition. And you'll have the foundation you need to look at these men and women who put their lives on the line for us. They weren't trying to be no heroes. They didn't have no money. Garvey didn't have no money. Malcolm didn't have no money. Booker might have had a little bit in his pocket when he died. But they didn't do this for money. They gave their lives with the hope that we'd be smart enough to take the knowledge they give us and lead ourselves and our people to freedom. They weren't trying to be heroes. They were trying to be successful at liberation, using the tools that was available to them. That's what this process is about. I wish I could have had more for my children. I wish I could have given Carol more. She's been with me 50 years, never took the woman on a honeymoon. I think I only took on one vacation in my life in 50 years. But she don't miss a day coming in the same bedroom with me. But my old broke up knee got me sleeping on another floor now for the last 4 months. You know, how could I ever make up to that woman? Because I choose the path that I chose to do the best I could to fight for Black people. When we didn't have money to pay the bills, I was sending money to causes. But I never tell her. I just be broke. And I'm sure those men went through the same thing. No, I don't want to be nobody's hero. Except my little babies. If anybody's seen me sometime when I'm online, my kids, little grannies come up in here, and I'll put them on the screen with me. Yeah, for them and for this race, I'll die. I remember we were in high school, Georgetown, South Carolina. And in our alma mater, the alma mater wasn't just the high school, it was the black race. The church wasn't just the church, it was the black race, it was the village, it was the African village. The high school was the African village. I remember there was one verse in our alma mater, in our song. Oh, Howard High, oh, Howard High, for you I'll die. Why would you say you will die for your high school? Because we weren't talking about the high school. For you I'll die. Our hopes and dreams, our hope and dreams, our pleasant dreams. And we ended with saying, you are our flower. Oh, oh, Howard High, for you I'll die. Why are we telling the high school we'll die for? Because we weren't talking about the high school. We was talking about black people. But the high school was the symbol of who we were, as the church was the symbol of who we were. We didn't really start becoming white Christians until after the 1950s. We were Africans using the Christian church up until then. But this integration thing flipped a lot of stuff the wrong way. So, but it's studying history. Oh, I see somebody talking about my sweetest woman, Zora Neale Hurston.
Zora Neale Hurston. Yeah, my son read a book about
that
her.
Lady, you got to read everything that she ever wrote.
Yeah, yeah.
Now that was a black goddess right there. I mean, and she and Langston Hughes got into it because Langston thought she was too geeky, gala, and black. And tried to get her to change that last book she wrote, because she wrote it in the Gullah colloquial, and she didn't change it. I got a copy of it somewhere around here that I copied off the line. But one thing she said that stays with me all the time, a very simple little ditty, I call it. She says, to be there, you got to go there. But to go there, you have got to know there.
Facts.
To be there, you got to go there.
But to go there,
Zora,
you have to know there.
You have to know there.
Ashe.
So, and so read Zora Neale Hurston, for God's sake. Anything she wrote. If you find a sentence on a sidewalk in the woods and somebody says Zora Neale Hurston wrote that sentence, read it and study it, because you're going to learn something from her about being black. A black woman at that time in history that stood up in the manner she stood up. And when those Negroes in the Harlem Renaissance didn't appreciate her Africanness, she went back to Florida and worked as a housemaid. With all of her degrees. Take care of her mama. She was being African, not talking African.
Being African. Ashe. Ashe. Well, Baba, let me drop a bomb for you. You dropped a lot of fire tonight. Fire, 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 fire! So, Professor, what are your closing words for the listening audience?
Learn to love the God in you, and you'll learn to truly love you. And if you learn to truly love you, you couldn't help but truly loving me. Because the Yoruba said, look on me, I belong to you, and you belong to me.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Well, Professor, thank you so much for coming on the platform. I know I nag you and bug you, and but you do come through for me.
You're my
so I do. You do come through for me, and I do appreciate it. You drop so much knowledge. In fact, when this broadcast is over, all I'm going to do is just sit in my bedroom, lights out, and just listen to you. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of books that you recommended. I wrote down the 3 books. One is out of print, but I'm going to go to everyone's place. The Booker T. Washington in Africa, The Making of a Pan-Africanist. It's out of print on Amazon, but I'll shoot to everyone's place. And I'm pretty sure that Baba Nati has it at everyone's place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll check.
I got a few extra copies. I can send you a copy.
Okay.
Text me your address and I'll mail it.
Will do, Bob, and I appreciate that. So you gave us a lot of knowledge, and like I said, I need to go back and listen to you tonight. I'm going to do it with a pen and pad, and just soak it all in, because it was just so much that you talked about. The Atlanta Compromise. You talked about the different organizations that Booker T and W.E.B. Dubois founded. I mean, you talked about so much that, like I said, I just want to go back and research. And so I thank you, Professor Small, from the bottom of my heart for being with us this evening. I know that you're tired. We've been on for over an hour. And so I know you're winding down. I'm winding down as well. I just want to acknowledge the people in the building. Baba Amin, he was in the building. Thank you so much. It was Sean Gales who tagged him, and he said, Baba, you got to get in here. He said, Professor James Small is dropping. He's doing a legendary lecture right now, and they're not even trying. And so I just want to say peace and love to Brother Sean and Baba Amin. Brother Mitchell Guest was in the building. My little brother, Jehudi Ma'at, he was in the building. I saw him tonight. My brother, Dean Russell. Jesse Johnson, he was very, very engaged in the chat, and I want to thank him as well. I'm trying to think who else. I saw a beautiful mind. That sister was in the building. Africa the Great was in the building. And I'm looking through Queen Mother Althea. She was in the building. Brother Craig Samuels, I see you. You're in the building. Brother Scriptures was in the building. So I just thank everyone for tuning in tonight. And join me back here, family, tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Read Book Club. We're going to be discussing chapter 4 of the book, The Color of Money by Mersha Baradaran. And we're going to get into Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt had the New Deal. And we're going to talk about how the New Deal did not benefit Black people. And so that's what the discussion is going to be about. What was the New Deal that was brought forth by President Roosevelt? And did that impact Black people? How did it impact Black people? Who did it benefit? And so we'll be talking about that tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you don't tune in tomorrow, I pray that you have a Black-tastic week. Peace and Black power.
Let's combat and fight back with maltracks. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classes. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr. Maat.